What a great turnout. I want to thank you all. My name's Todd O'Hare. I'm the president and CEO of the Montana Chamber of Commerce. And I want to welcome you to the kickoff of the Montana Chamber of Commerce's Business Days at the Capitol. This is our 25th year, our silver anniversary. And so I'm going to warn you right now, we are sold out. We oversold, and we have a waiting list of about 50 people. It's the first time in our history that I have heard Stacy Dorrington, who does our events, actually wish for a storm in order to reduce some of the numbers that we're going to have to deal with over the course of the next 2 days. So again, it's an honor to have you here. This is going to be a busy session. We have this every year. This is particularly a busy year because we're going into a legislative session. We have a full suite of issues that we're going to be tackling and taking the lead on. You'll see our priority board out front there, and it's everything from tax reform to Medicaid access and preserving that important component of our Montana economy, to housing, childcare, and everything in between. Our theme this year for Business Days at the Capitol is around energy. And the reason it is energy is that as we look ahead over the course of the next 10 years, energy is probably going to be the number one issue that is going to settle around not only our country, but our region and this state. Energy is going to become not only a national issue, it's also going to become an economic issue, it's also going to become a national security issue. And unless we go into the next 10 years with our eyes wide open around what energy means to our economy and to our national security, we're going to get it wrong. And so we've made energy a focus of what we're going to be talking about over the course of the next 2 days, because it's not only a threat to Montana's economy and to our country, but there's also a great opportunity for us if we get it right. And so we're committed to getting this right. From organizations such as Weyerhaeuser and Pinion, formerly known as AZ, that have been members of the Montana Chamber of Commerce for over 60 years, to newer members like JWT Capital and Big Sky Resort Area, we want to thank you for trusting the Montana Chamber of Commerce for being your representative and the voice of business, not only during legislative years, but in non-legislative years. I'd like to take a second here because this isn't possible without the volunteer board of directors that we have both at the Montana Chamber of Commerce and at the Montana Chamber Foundation. Would our board of directors please stand so that we can thank you for your service in keeping Montana on track? So I encourage you to reach out to them. You've got faces with names now, and feel free to provide them with your insights and your thoughts and priorities as we go forward. It's important, and I want to also take a minute here to introduce the rest of the staff of the Montana Chamber of Commerce. Because this is a sold-out event, and we're going to have a busy couple of days, we want to make sure that your time here is valuable, that you have everything that you need, and I want you to be able to put faces with names of folks that you can turn to get some assistance or guidance, or if you have questions about anything that you might have. And so I'm going to introduce our staff. I'm going to start with D. Where's Diamond D. Durand? Diamond, you need to... Come on, Diamond. She's working on it. Most of you know Diamond D. Durand. There she is. Diamond. Diamond has been with... Diamond D has been with the Montana Chamber of Commerce for close to 40 years now, and she's the real boss of the organization. She makes sure that we keep appropriate amount of sparkle in our organization. James Easton isn't here. He's helping folks in the green room that are going to be speaking later today. James does all of our high school education sort of work. He's a real dynamic individual. works great with high school kids. He's a former high school teacher. Sheridan Hoyer, Sheridan's there at the back of the room. Sheridan does government affairs for us, and Sheridan also leads our childcare efforts, and so she is our resident expert on childcare issues, which is, we wouldn't have the presence that we have today on childcare if it wasn't for Sheridan. Thank you, Sheridan. Stacy Dorrington, there's Stacy. Stacy's responsible for putting together our big events here and all of the events that we do. Thank you, Stacy. Candace Strauss is here in the front. Candace is our Vice President of Communications and Marketing. She's going to be posting things on social media. Thank you, Candace. Matt Olson. Oh, and I want to also mention, Candace also leads up our Women in Business conference that comes up in March. And I would love to promote that more other than to just tell you it's already sold out, which gives you an idea of the sort of success that is. But if you want to see if you can get Candace to squeeze you in an extra chair, right there she is, right there. Where is Matt Olson? Matt Olson back here. Matt is in charge of our strategy and network development. If you've got a business and you want to know who else it is that you should meet that's within your network, Matt is the guy to talk to. Charles Robinson leads our government affairs. There's Charles there in the back. Charles is going to have an incredibly busy session ahead of him because we're looking at this session with a sense of urgency, with a lot of opportunities that we can accomplish on behalf of the Montana business community. So with that, I would like to now, we got Cora Rosanova that's here as well. And Cora Rosanova is working with us. Cora is doing a lot of our membership sort of work, and so thank you, Cora, for being here. So it's my pleasure now to turn this over to the Chair of the Montana Chamber of Commerce Board of Directors, Vice President of Communications and Government Relations at Sandfire Resources, Nancy Schlepp, who is co-emceeing this with Tony Rosanova, who will be our incoming chair next year. Nancy?
Thank you so much, Todd, and welcome everyone to Helena. It is always with great anticipation that we love to be here on a legislative year. And for the past 25 years, the Montana Chamber has brought the business community and lawmakers together for business days at the Capitol. Always an exciting time to be here at the beginning of the legislative session. And please know that your board of directors is working very hard along with Todd and his team to make sure that we have another successful season. It is with a sense of urgency that we go into this session to get as much done for the business community as possible. And we want to continue to be your voice for the business community. Not only do we have great folks that work with us and are on our board now, but we would like to recognize one of our great leaders who used to be on the board and who is retiring. And so for the past 17 years, this leader has led Glacier Bancorp as Executive Vice President and Chief Administrative Officer. And his retirement in February will leave some big shoes to fill, not only in the banking industry, but in leadership in Montana. He has been a long friend of the business community and an avid supporter of the Montana Chamber, and has served both not only on our board but also on our foundation board. He's also a dear friend of mine as we went through Leadership Montana together in 2017, and so I would love to welcome Don Cherry to the stage to accept his award. Yeah, we surprised Don. He did not know this was going to happen. And so he gets a Lifetime Business Advocate Award from the Montana Chamber. Thank you, Don. Gosh, you scooted right off of here before I could ask you if you wanted to say a few words. Maybe at the bar later. Okay. One of the strengths of our Montana Chamber is convening stakeholders at signature events such as this. Over the years, a staple at these events are Gary Tyree and Tony Anderson of Video Express Productions, and we could not do this without the two of you, so we'd like to acknowledge you and thank you so much for taking care of us. And most importantly, I'd like to acknowledge our sponsors. Your support creates opportunities for all of our attendees to have a great experience here with us. Due to the record number of sponsors, we will be acknowledging you throughout the event instead of all together. And we'd also like to take time to thank you individually. Sponsors are easily recognized by their ribbon on their name badge. Our powerhouse sponsors this year are Google and Berkshire Hathaway Energy Montana. Platinum level sponsors, Applied Materials, Atlantic Richfield, AT&T, Blue Cross Blue Shield of Montana, Boeing, Burlington Northern Santa Fe Railway, First Interstate Bank, Holland and Hart, Montana Department of Commerce, Montana State Fund, Northwestern Energy, Republic Services, Stockman Bank, University of Montana, and Valley Bank of Helena. We thank you all for your support. So it is a privilege now to introduce my co-MC, who is also the incoming chair next year of the Montana Chamber, Tony Rosanova with New Rose Consulting and newly retired from Zoot Enterprises. And we welcome Tony to the stage.
Good afternoon. Thank you for coming. Thank you for taking the time out of your schedule. We understand how busy the start of the year is. We understand how busy your lives are. But we also know that if we don't take time and engage in meaningful conversations across the state, we won't change the environments we're in, we won't improve the environments, and the time you're committing to listen, to participate in narrative and dialogue is critically important. And so we wanted to start with just a simple thank you. We also know that the State Chamber is a critical part of what happens in Montana, but it happens because of business and because of business owners and the relationship with the legislature. And we're very appreciative of that. We do have a very busy schedule today. And so with that, what we want to do is start just introducing some of the topics. We know that you guys are in the middle of your meal, but we'd like to get the conversation going. We want to ensure that you understand who the speakers are. There are bios in your agendas and your folios. We're not going to take time to walk through the bios. We're going to ask you guys to look at that, and we're going to have the conversation really be the meat of the conversation. So as you see the next topic coming up, there's a full bio of the individuals there, and we'd ask you to really engage that. We do have Q&A sessions after each seminar, and the chamber team will be moving around the room with microphones, and if you have a question, please raise your hand, and we'll get a microphone over there to you. We'd love to have the microphone intact so that we actually can hear your question. Sometimes it's easy to jump to the question, but the audience didn't get to hear the question, and so consequently, responses can be out of context if you didn't hear the full question. So tonight, we really encourage you guys to come to our session, and the speakers will be there. There will be networking opportunities there for everyone to have an opportunity to really engage, and part of this event is you get face-to-face opportunities to talk to the people that are on stage or that are talking about these subjects. We really encourage you to take advantage of that opportunity. So with that, it's my honor to introduce our first speaker. Please join me in welcoming Clark Mather, Executive Director of Northwest River Partners. Clark is going to kick things off by painting a compelling picture of energy, supply, and demand, and setting the tone for what promises to be a really thoughtful and interactive session. So please welcome Clark to the stage.
Hello, Tony, thank you for that introduction. I really appreciate it. We're going to have a slide deck that I'll walk through today, but first I want to thank the Montana Chamber staff and Todd and the team, Stacy, James that just walked me over, Matt that picked me up from the airport early this morning. There was a few of us that had a little bit of a hectic travel schedule getting here from Salt Lake City. So I appreciate that bit of partnership, but the Montana Chamber has been a huge ally to us and Todd's leadership in not only advocating for common sense energy policies that support people and take a balanced approach to these really sticky issues, but also the Chamber in partnership with Flathead Electric and the Montana Electric Cooperative Association has been very, very helpful in ascertaining public opinion in Montana. We actually just updated some of that survey data at Northwest River Partners where I work, and we'll talk through some of that information today. I also just want to give a shout out to Todd for his emceeing the inaugural ceremonies on Monday. I mean, what a cool thing. Todd, I could tell, was very moved by that. I had a chance to talk with him today. I mean, what an honor to do that, and I think it really speaks to the Montana Chamber's relationship with the Gianforte administration, but also the relationships that Todd and the Chamber have built in Montana. And also, I just want to say it's a privilege for me to be back in Montana. My mom was born in Butte. My grandfather ran a small grocery store in Butte for a while. Her parents are both very proud Montanans. We have stories about Evel Knievel, some of which may or may not be true from Butte in those days. But my family has a lot of ties to Montana, so it's really great to be back here. So I think Todd wanted me to talk about energy supply and demand. And what I really wonder is if he wanted me to scare you all a little bit. And it's actually not that hard to scare people about these subjects. Let me see if I can point this clicker. Turn it on. Oh, turn it on? Ah, perfect. There we go. There we go. So it's not that hard to be scary. I don't have to be overtly fear-mongering to do this because there are some real challenges facing folks in Montana, facing folks in the Pacific Northwest, and frankly facing the United States as we think about energy policy and keeping the lights on. For those of you that don't know how these lights stay on in this room or how your home stay warm if you have electric heat or how your business runs, it is a miracle. The folks like Mark Johnson and the folks in Northwestern who you'll hear from later, working with Bonneville and WAPA and other energy suppliers, literally have to keep the system in near perfect balance every few seconds. Every few seconds, 24/7, 365, whether it's 30 degrees below zero, as it can be here in Montana, as you all know well, or whether it's more than 100 degrees across the Western Interconnection or across the Pacific Northwest. These folks do miraculous work. And this study from the Western Electric Coordinating Council, which came out at the end of last year, really highlights some of the dangers that we're facing. Look at the first sentence. The supply of electricity is not keeping up with growth. Throughout the West, the Western Energy Coordinating Council projects 20% growth over the next decade. I'll talk about a more regional study later in this process. But when you think, or later in this presentation, but when you think about the challenges facing Montanans, particularly in cold weather and warm weather, how we're going to grow our economy, how we're going to do so in an affordable way, these challenges on reliable energy are life and death issues. They're economic development issues. I noticed the Governor Gianforte put together an energy conversation in December, citing this study and others. These are really, really big issues. So I'm very thankful that the Montana Chamber and all of you are spending time today to learn about energy issues, because these are everyday issues, they're life and death issues, and they're really key to the economic development here in Montana. So I just want to talk a little bit about who Northwest River Partners is. We're basically a member-driven organization. We have about 95 members across the Pacific Northwest. A lot of them are consumer-owned utilities like Flathead Electric Cooperative. You'll hear from Mark Johnson from Flathead, who's on my board, but we also have Rivali Electric, Lincoln Electric Cooperative, Northern Lights Cooperative, Missoula Electric Cooperative are our members as well. And we are really looking for fact-based, science-based solutions to support hydropower. Hydropower is the foundational energy resource here in Montana from an electricity perspective. It has been the foundational electricity resource across the Pacific Northwest generally for decades. And we think that there's a good reason to continue to support hydropower because of its affordable attributes. It's key to ensuring reliability and helping us as we transition and grow our economy, that we have this hydropower resource that's available those every few seconds as your utilities provide those services. We have consumer-owned utilities, we have labor organizations, we have agricultural organizations, and others that are supportive of keeping hydropower and bringing common sense, science-based solutions to energy policy in our region. So I've already talked about this a little bit, but still half of the energy generating capacity in the Pacific Northwest is hydropower. If you're in western Montana and you have the benefit of getting service from the Bonneville Power Administration, about 3/4 of your electricity comes from hydropower. Overall in Montana, I think it's about 45%. So hydropower has been the foundational energy resource, electricity resource across the Northwest for a long time. I know that there has been retirements of coal generating facilities in Montana that's changed your mix. That's exacerbating the challenges. That's one of the things that the Western Energy Coordinating Council or Electricity Coordinating Council talked about in their report. But hydropower is a really essential resource here in the region. It's also important for other reasons. Our hydropower system is not just about energy. That's really, really important. But it also provides a series of locks and dams that's not only important to the Pacific Northwest, but it's important to the nation as a whole. If you didn't know, if you go out to Astoria, Oregon, and go all the way up to Lewiston, Idaho, there's 8 dams and locks that allow barge traffic to go up and down that river, supporting billions of dollars of business, not only for the Northwest, but for the entire country. That area is the #1 wheat export gateway in the United States of America. It's also among the top export gateways for corn and soy. It supports tens of thousands of jobs, and keeps a lot of trucks off our roads, keeps our highways in better condition, and we have capacity there that is unused. We think that part of the conversation about breaching, particularly the 4 dams on the lower Snake River, and breaching hydropower facilities is forgetting this essential aspect of economic activity that is supported by that dam and lock system on our rivers. So how many of you have heard the narrative that salmon are going extinct in the Pacific Northwest? Raise your hand. And how many of you have heard the narrative that dams are a big reason that salmon are going extinct? So I appreciate you all being brave. As I've gone around the Northwest and talked to folks, I had a chance with Flathead support to do a number of meetings here in Kalispell over the summer. There is some real misinformation out there about the impact that dams have on salmon and steelhead, and so I want to share some information with you. So first, I want to be really clear. Every energy resource has an impact on the people and the ecosystem around it, and I don't want to leave anybody with the impression that dams don't have an impact on the ecosystem and the communities around them. But here's what we know. This is data from the University of Washington, and if you don't know, juvenile salmon, basically their life cycle is they're born in rivers, they go out the rivers and spend a few years out in the ocean, and then they come back. And at each of the federal facilities, they account the adult salmon as they come back up through the dams and go back to spawn and create a new generation of salmon or steelhead. So there's lots of talks about millions of salmon that used to be in the system, probably in the 19th century, and we don't dispute that that's the case. But here's what we do know. Bonneville Dam was the first federal dam on the Columbia River. It's also the most downstream dam on the Columbia River. And so when Bonneville Dam went into operation in 1938, they counted every adult salmon that returned that year. 456,000 adult salmon and steelhead returned at Bonneville that year. I just looked at the numbers before I got on the plane to come out here. 1.79 million, roughly, salmon and steelhead returned past Bonneville this year. That's 3.9 times more what returned in 1938. So you might ask, well, what's happening on the Snake River? I don't have a graphic for that in this presentation. So there's lots of controversy about the Snake River. Lots of controversy about those dams, those 4 federal dams on the lower Snake River. So Lower Granite Dam is the most upstream of those dams. It's close to Lewiston, Idaho. So salmon that get to Lower Granite Dam have to pass 8 federal dams on their way to Lower Granite. Lower Granite went into operation in 1975. Salmon and steelhead returns are 4.5 times higher in 2024 than they were in 1975. And in fact, only 1 year in the almost 50 years they've been counting fish at Lower Granite Dam have less salmon returned, it was 1979, than in the first year of Lower Granite's operation. So some people also say, well, gosh, this is just a one-off, one-year thing. So if you take the 15-year average, both at Bonneville Dam and at Lower Granite, fish returns on average have tripled what they were in 1938 at Bonneville, and they are quadruple what they were at Lower Granite Dam. There's more work to do. My organization is willing to talk to anybody who thinks that there are ways to balance the multiple needs of energy, transportation, salmon in the Pacific Northwest. We're looking at different solutions. There's more work to do for various stocks of salmon. But we think that the significant investment that electric ratepayers have made in that infrastructure to improve the life cycle of salmon and steelhead is working. It's showing results. And we think that there are some balanced solutions where we can have affordable, reliable, clean hydropower and also protect salmon and steelhead. So with all this conversation from WEC, from all the challenges that I hear from my members in Montana and across the Northwest, there is a real serious push to either breach federal facilities on the lower Snake River or breach other federal hydropower facilities, or to continue turning down the output of those facilities by policy or through the federal courts. We think we need a more balanced approach. Again, I really appreciate the fact that Governor Gianforte is bringing together people to talk about energy options. He's talking about unleashing American energy options. I would argue that turning up the output of our federal system, which has been turned down over the last few years, should also be one of those options that we consider as we look at balanced approaches to balance affordability and reliability in the system. But these conversations about breaching are very real. Katie Fennigs is here from Flathead Electric. She's part of a federal process that's looking at a study by the Pacific Northwest National Lab. We have a lot of concerns about that process. Just before Christmas, the Biden administration wants to do another study. We just did a study 4 years ago that basically determined the dams should stay in place. Now they want to look at redoing that study. And again, if you look at the regional studies, remember I said that across the Western Interconnection, which goes all the way from Canada down to Baja, Mexico, 20% load growth. My colleague Crystal Ball, who does energy forecasting, that's literally a person, she's an amazing professional. Her organization found that there will be 30% load growth in the Pacific Northwest. And a lot of it is the topics that you're going to talk about at this conference: data center growth, electrification of transportation and buildings across the Pacific Northwest. A lot of people wanting to move here to the region. This is an amazing place to live. So these are real issues, not only nationally, not only across the West, but here in the Pacific Northwest as well. And again, now, these are life and death issues. One of the things that we nearly had a significant blackout over the MLK weekend in 2024. We're coming up on the 1-year anniversary of that. You all lived through it. When I was in Tacoma at the time, I thought it was pretty cold. It was 25 degrees above zero Fahrenheit. And then I talked to Katie and Mark at Flathead, and they told me it was 34 degrees below zero in Kalispell, Montana. It didn't get above 0 degrees Fahrenheit for 100 consecutive hours. And the entire Northwest energy system was operating on the knife's edge. Power prices that are normally around $50 or $60 per megawatt hour on the wholesale market got up to $1,900 a megawatt hour. The Bonneville Power Administration, which serves a lot of western Montana, burned through $300 million of reserves that weekend alone, or during that period alone, just to keep the lights on for preference customers. So we think that hydropower that we have here in the region, where we have transmission available, is really important to control, because Montana is the biggest consumer per capita of energy in the United States because of your extreme cold and your extremely warm weather in the summertime. So having that hydro system, that federal system, is very, very important from a life and death perspective. And we're seeing the affordability issues coming up, and I'm going to talk about some of our public opinion surveys later. But when you look at the Energy Information Administration data, it's really shocking. Between 2022 and 2023, retail electric prices in Montana went up 10%. They vastly outpaced the US average. And we're seeing that across the Pacific Northwest. In places like Oregon, it went up more than 11%. Washington State, which used to have the cheapest electricity in the country, is barely in the top 10. anymore. Again, at the same time we're turning down the foundational, affordable electricity resource in the Pacific Northwest by policy and court order. We think that's the wrong approach for people, and we think we can do better. This is the other part that I think is really interesting as part of this conversation. So when I was out in Kalispell, again, Katie and Mark and the team did an awesome job, Ron from Flathead as well. I met Chris Sidmore, who's the executive director of the Flathead, Montana Food Bank. And Chris came up to me after one of our presentations at a Rotary Club, and he said that every time energy prices goes up, he sees more people coming through his food bank. And he has 7,000 members. He did a survey, 32% of clients are coming to the food bank because of energy-related challenges in their lives. And so in talking to Chris, we took Chris back to DC with us, with Katie and others, and I'll talk a little bit more about that later. The other thing that Chris shared with the congressional delegation in Washington, DC, is the one thing that his food bank and his clients can't survive is a 24-hour or so outage, particularly in the summertime, because if all of his refrigerated food goes bad, his folks have nowhere else to go. So when you think about affordability, when you think about reliability, these really are life and death issues, and Chris's input and his clients' input was very, very helpful for us making that case. Also, we just want to talk about an update in our public opinion data, and again, the Montana Chamber has been awesome working with us in the past. So we just had a survey in the field in October of 2024. We had surveyed 400 people from across Montana, 1,600 people or so across the Pacific Northwest. So it's statistically significant from a survey perspective. Affordability on energy is the number one issue. It's actually overtaken climate change as the number one issue. So when you think about that data from EIA, you think about retail electric prices going up, we're seeing that in our survey data. And I would argue that the election results in November are because of some of these clear pocketbook issues that people are facing as they're dealing with rising costs, including energy costs in the region. So we think affordability is a growing concern among the Northwest as we see electric rates continue to rise. I also just want to share with you, I think there's some elected officials here in the room. I know we've got some congressional staff. You can talk about hydropower and it's okay. As I've traveled around, there are people that are concerned about talking about hydropower because they think it's a really contentious issue. If you look at this survey data, 3 in 4 people across the Pacific Northwest support hydropower as an electric generating resource. And again, we just added Montana to our survey. It's interesting to me because people think of Washington and Montana maybe as kind of maybe differently politically. And you look at the approval for hydropower between Washington and Montana, it's the same number, 79%. So we really, again, we appreciate you all leaning into these issues. We appreciate you all considering being advocates for hydropower. And it's something that your neighbors support, the region supports, and we're hoping to bring that rounder perspective to these energy conversations. So I think we've got some good opportunities. It's really interesting. You look at this data, you look at 3 in 4 people supporting hydropower in the Northwest. We're seeing support for breaching the Lower Snake River Dam, which was never high, going down. We're seeing these affordability issues. You have an amazing congressional delegation here in Montana. Senator Daines has been an awesome supporter of hydropower in the U.S. Congress. He worked on bipartisan, frankly, pretty moderate hydropower relicensing legislation in the last Congress that we thought we had a deal on with the NGOs that helped put together the package. Ironically, some of those NGOs actually lobbied against it once the bill was introduced. But Senator Daines has been awesome. Congressman Zinke has been a huge supporter of hydropower in the region. And we look forward to working with Senator Sheehy and Representative Downing as well and having conversations with them. But you have a really good congressional delegation it seems to be aligned with the incoming administration. Again, we're trying to, as this 1214 agreement is being implemented, this agreement that the Biden administration came up with in December 2023 that helps keep us out of court. We have a lot of concerns with how that's being implemented. It's too many to go through here, but again, Katie and others in Montana are participating in those processes. We think that there are ways where we don't have to talk about breaching. There are balanced approaches that protect people, protect salmon, and can help us get to a more balanced energy approach. And what we're trying to do is to also build coalitions. So you see that picture in the end. We did this picture with some kind of quotes, some thought bubbles with us. So we have Chris Sidmore when we came back to DC. We have the International Brotherhood of Electrical Workers, Local 77, who has 7,000 members across the Northwest, including in Montana. We have utility executives aligned. We have the Washington Association of Wheat Growers. And again, part of what we're trying to do is to show that with the Chamber's support and others, that the region does care about hydropower. We can find balanced approaches that work together, and there is an alignment across a broad swath of the population, and to talk to policymakers about that. So again, I appreciate the chance to be here today. There are some really challenging times ahead. One of the things I did want to mention is that if you look at that WEC report, the reliability issues, what they call resource adequacy, which really means just keeping the lights on. If you look at their projections, particularly for the western part of Montana and the Northwest, they're projecting the demand at risk hours, which are basically the hours you're at risk for a blackout, to go up basically 100 times between 2025 and 2034. These are real issues. People are struggling to hang on. We think hydropower is part of that solution. We think a balanced approach to energy policy is part of that solution. So I appreciate the chance to talk with you all today. Happy to take some questions, and we appreciate the support of the Montana Chamber. Thank you. Any questions, or did I put you to sleep? Yes. I see a question over there.
I know that many of the dams that we have in Montana and throughout the country are built in the 30s and 40s. The infrastructure report card just came out saying that Montana's infrastructure as a whole is around C-. How concerned are you about maintenance of dams throughout Montana and the region?
Yeah, I don't know all of the specifics around maintenance about specific facilities in Montana or the maintenance plans for any particular dam. I do think that is something, it's a serious issue. I know on the federal system, there's a lot of the ratepayer dollars that go to Bonneville, for example, go for maintenance and upkeep of the actual facilities, upgrading turbines, for example, to make them more fish-friendly and efficient. Huge investments to provide, again, a more fish-friendly experience, both for juvenile baby fish going downstream and adult returners. So I think that we've got to keep investing in that infrastructure. You know, those bits of infrastructure are important for energy. I didn't even talk about flood control. A lot of those dams provide very essential flood control. That was a big motivator behind the system on the Columbia River system, and particularly a flood in 1948. So we got to keep investing in those systems, and we want to make sure that the federal government is doing that, and others are doing that as well. Oh, yes.
Thank you so much. I'm Frederick from the Montana Department of Commerce.
Yeah.
So there was a question like, can anyone say what is the U.S. energy policy as a country? And so some would say that's a very difficult question to answer. So they say maybe you should start with a regional policy. Are you seeing more regional policy cooperation? Is that a good place to start?
So I would say that the region has gone a little bit this way on energy policy. And again, we think that based on our survey data, the people who live here, the millions of people who live here, are really much more closely aligned. Again, part of what we're trying to do is where we see those gaps, you know, and some of them are based on generally political gaps, trying to bring people back together. I worked for the congressional delegation early in my career, a long time ago now. And when there were threats to Bonneville or hydropower generally, like that day, the delegation came together on a bipartisan basis to stand up, whether it was, you know, moving to market-based rates or anything that would deal with hydropower or the system as a whole. I don't see that muscle as developed now. And part of it, again, is we're trying to get the facts out there. We know that dams and salmon can and do coexist. We know that we have these huge energy challenges coming forward. We know that affordability is a huge challenge, not only for residential customers, but I think industrial rates in Montana have gone up over 40% over the last 10 years. So how do you deal with those things while you're turning off one of your biggest sources of affordable energy? So we're hopeful that if we can bring the right coalition together, we can bring the region back together. I mean, that's frankly a big part of our job. Hopefully that answers your question. Yeah. Any other questions? Oh,
I'm from Oregon, so I'll ask the Oregon-specific
Okay.
question. But could you talk about what you see as the implications for the region of the removal of the Klamath Dam?
yeah. So, I mean, if you haven't been following it, I think there are 4 dams on the Klamath River that basically under an agreement with PacifiCorp, the states of Oregon and California and others, they've agreed to remove. I'll just share that one of the implications that I see is making an oranges to oranges comparison between removing those dams and removing the Snake River dams. I actually was part of, I worked for a member of Congress that removed the dams on the lower Elwha River in Washington State. The Klamath River project, from an energy perspective, the capacity of those dams is about 163 megawatts. The Snake River dams have 3,000 plus megawatts of capacity. On average, they serve a city the size of Seattle on an average energy basis. There is not the river transportation aspect of those dams that we have here in our region, again, which drives our economy, it drives our food security, all of those things. The broader federal hydropower system, of course, provides significant flood control, which we haven't really touched on here, which is not as big a component of those facilities. So from an energy perspective, from an irrigation perspective, from a river transportation perspective, they are not the same facilities. I am concerned, and I think we should all be mindful that there has been a very concerted effort. I mean, you've seen this project talked about in the New York Times and other national news media, that there will be those that say, well, now we got the Klamath done, let's go to the Northwest. And we just don't think that that's the right thing to do because they are much different facilities. Our facilities are very valuable when the value proposition on the Klamath project was much, much less than what we have here in the Northwest. Any other questions? Or maybe I'm out of time. All right, Matt, thank you.